Before we get started with this Clarify podcast, I just wanted to let the parents know that this episode struggles with some adult topics. So if you have little kids in the area, you may want to consider turning it down or putting some headphones in. Thanks for joining us on the Clarify podcast, where Kelsey and Ben answer any questions that you, the congregation, have texted in. Do you have questions? Are you confused? Let us clarify.
So we're recording this just as kind of a backup. If something happens and we can't record a certain week, we'll have a few of these random topics that we probably wouldn't hit otherwise. And so the one we're going to hit today, this is coming off the heels of episode 2, all the way back then. Well, maybe depending when we'd actually post this, on Genesis 38. And Andy in his sermon yesterday skipped over it. And a lot of sermons I've heard through Genesis kind of, they don't brush over it, but they just kind of like, it's kind of this weird chapter in the middle of the Joseph story. And so
a weird, very dramatic story.
Yes. Yes. And so why is it in there?
That is a good question. Well, first I'll just kind of start by quick summarizing what happened. So Judah is one of Jacob's sons. So he's one of the fathers of one of the 12 tribes, being the tribe of Judah. And this weird story is in here. So about the same time, starting in Genesis 38, that Joseph gets sold off to the Midianites.
Right.
Judah goes and he has a friend who's not a Hebrew. And in that culture, he finds a wife. And he has 3 sons, and they are Onan, and Shelah. The oldest son, takes a wife, and her name is Tamar. And for whatever reason, we are told that was very wicked. And so God struck him down. And at that time...
Epic.
I know. That is epic. At that time, the culture was that the next brother, the brother-in-law's duty, if the first brother's wife, if the first brother dies before he could have an heir, basically, because
right.
It would be the brother-in-law's duty to have an heir for his brother's line to go on. And so the second son, Onan, goes to Tamar, and he does the marital act with Tamar, but instead of continue... there's a birth control method called withdrawal, and that's what he decides to do. So he doesn't fulfill what he's supposed to do, okay? These are really fun topics. But they're so juicy, you guys. Okay, so we're going to have to put the parental note on this one, too. So God just sees that as wicked, and he strikes Onan down, too, because he did not do the duty as a brother-in-law to give his brother an heir. And then, Judah says to Tamar, hey, I'm not giving you my third son. He's too young. But really, he was just scared that he was going to lose a third son, because I think he thinks something's wrong with Tamar because all his sons keep dying when they sleep with Tamar.
I mean, valid.
Sure. And so time goes on, and Judah's wife dies, and he goes off to check on his sheep after his time of mourning, and he goes out with his friends, and Tamar hears that he's going to be out in this area. So she goes out, and she dresses like a prostitute. At this point, I'm going, what is this girl doing? So she goes out dressed as a prostitute, and she tricks Judah into sleeping with her. But he comes to the road where she is, and he's like, hey, sleep with me. And she's like, you need to pay me. What are you going to pay me? And he's like, well, I got a goat, but I don't have it with me. So here's my signet ring and his staff. And she's like, okay, I'll take that. And he sleeps with her, and she goes on. And then
I don't know what I would do for a goat, but probably not that.
A goat was pretty valuable at that time, I think. Anyway.
I would hope so.
It would have to be. It would have to be. But it seems to me that this is not her main. She wasn't out there for a goat. I think she's got something else in mind. So,
Love it.
I know. So Judah goes, he deals with the sheep, and he comes back with his goat, and she wasn't there. And so he asks around, hey, where is this prostitute that was by the road? And they're like, there wasn't a prostitute here, you crazy old man. And he's like, well, I don't want to keep asking because I don't want people to be embarrassed, So he's like, I just let her have my stuff, and maybe she never comes back for me for this goat, whatever. So he goes on, and then 3 months time goes by, and he hears from the rumor mill that his daughter-in-law Tamar is pregnant, and she was being a prostitute. And he's like, okay, hammer down, we're gonna burn her, because that's what they did then. And
sounds like a fun Tuesday night.
I know. So then she comes back, and she's like, okay, that's fine. You can burn me. But just so you know, the person who's the father of this child, this is his stuff. And Judah's like, ooh, crap. That's my stuff. So at the end of the story, he's like, well, she was definitely more wise than I was and more righteous than I was.
Well, if I'd necessarily say more wise.
Well, but she did trick him into acknowledging that he was treating her poorly.
Yeah.
And so, because at that time being a widow was not
right,
not a good thing. Okay, so then she goes to have the baby, and lo and behold, it's twins. And the first one sticks his arm out, and they put a red cord on it.
Right.
And the baby that actually comes all the way out is not the baby that stuck his arm out with the red cord. And so the first one is Perez, and the second one is, what's his name? Zerah. But that's not really terribly important. But the name is important because Perez, when we read in Matthew 1, is in the line of Jesus. So that's the story. Why is it here? What is the point of this in the middle of Joseph's story?
Yeah. Who knows? For one, there's answers out there, but there's not a clear-cut answer.
Sure.
And the best explanation I've heard is, do you know what the chapter right after this is? That was a question.
That was a question to me. Chapter right up, Joseph and Potiphar's wife.
Yeah, you cheated. But
It's never cheating to have my Bible.
I mean, I can't really argue that one. So you've got Judah and you've got his brother, Joseph. Mm-hmm. And both of them are dealing with a certain sin, or temptation, rather. And Judah just goes hog wild and says, yay to everything. And and Joseph obviously does not.
Yeah.
Joseph
shows restraint and runs from temptation. Right.
And so up until this point, well, all through the book of Genesis, right in Genesis 3, you've got the promise of the seed, the leader of the coming people. You've got in the covenant to Abraham, you've got the promise of land and seed and blessing. Some people have said it as land, nation, and leader. And so you, from Genesis 3, right from the beginning, you see like, hey, this might be our guy. You've got Cain, who obviously is not your guy. So he's, when God puts enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, well, Cain's obviously of the serpent, and then you've got Abel, and it's like, hey, maybe this is our guy. And then Cain kills him. And it's like, okay, maybe Seth's the guy. Well, Seth ends up dying. And then you've got the one righteous man, Noah. It's like, maybe maybe we're home free. And then Noah gets drunk and naked and everything. And I mean, nope, that's not our guy. And then you get to Joseph, and there's this contrast with Judah, because Judah is the leader of the brothers. He's the one that decides to sell Joseph into slavery. He's, for some reason, we don't really know why, he's kind of the self-designated leader, even though he's not the firstborn. Psalm 38 is kind of the complete opposite of 39. And so you see Joseph's like righteousness more clearly, because you've got his own brother, who's kind of the leader of the pack, doing some unspeakable things. And meanwhile, you've got Joseph, who the entire story of Joseph is not ever really condemned for anything. I mean, like Andy said during his sermon, like there's sometimes some commentaries and stuff that I'll say, well, he was prideful and everything, and maybe he was, but as compared to what Judah's doing, like Joseph is the polar opposite. And then it gets to the end, and you like everything. If you're reading the Bible for the very first time, that's everything about Joseph seems like he's that promised one. He is that guy. Look how good he is. And Genesis ends with him dying. So he's not the guy, but he's kind of a foreshadowing of Jesus to some degree. Yeah. But all of his righteousness, especially as he turns down Potiphar's wife multiple times, and that kind of catapults him into Pharaoh's house and finishes the rest of the story. That doesn't look near as like righteous. It almost seems like, well, that's what anybody would do. Maybe. Like you could have that mentality, but then you preface it with, no, this is what the other people were doing.
At the time.
Yeah,
Like, you need to know the cultural context here.
Yeah, like it's...
They were just picking up chicks on the side of the road and...
For a goat. Not only that, but you mentioned that Judah is... Like, the line of Jesus goes through Judah.
Yeah.
You've got people in Jesus's line like Rahab and who's the other one that you always point to?
Matthew 1 is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and Abraham to Isaac, Isaac to Jacob, Jacob to Judah. Judah is the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And she's specifically mentioned there. And, like, that's quite an honor where in the list of all these men, it's Tamar and Rahab, and is Ruth in here? I'd have to read it all out, and I won't do that right now. But there's very few women mentioned,
right?
Except Tamar's right there at the very beginning. So,
right. So not only is the line of Jesus throughout this whole thing, but like Judah having children with his daughter-in-law creates his entire tribe. It creates the line of Jesus. I mean, you just read that through Perez.
Yeah.
And so like, God's
it's kind of a story of redemption.
Yeah, and that line of Jesus makes, like, that would be a side note if we didn't have Genesis 38. Like, you read the line of Jesus, and it's like...
Who's Tamar?
It'd be like taking out the whole story of Rahab and being like, and Rahab, and like, well, why is Rahab?
Yeah,
who's this
why do
Rahab?
we care about her? Yeah, exactly.
So, why is it in there? I mean, we can make all these connections, but like, is that...
I just find it interesting, like you mentioned, that Joseph is like a contrast to Judah, and yet Judah is the one that God chooses Jesus to come through his line. I find that so amazing that, like, throughout all of his history, he chooses kind of the not so perfect ones, like the less
not even
than
the not so perfect, like the straight up evil sometimes.
True, and it just kind of like I just said, like a story of redemption. It is a picture of what he does with our lives, I think. Yeah. Like, because I can be straight up evil if we're being really honest in my darkest life. Like, sometimes I can be straight up evil, except for Jesus. Like, so that's beautiful.
And I mean, in the end, like, Judah was a believer. So even through, not even Judah, all the brothers, like, they've done some stuff that normal people like you and me have not. I've never sold somebody into slavery. I've never done unspeakable things for a goat. I've never offered to do unspeakable things for a goat.
I'm glad we ruled that out right now. I was really kind of wondering, but I'm glad we figured that out.
Yeah, Daryl made sure to bring that up in my interview process. This episode is never going to be able to be published after everything we've said.
It's a bonus. It's beautiful. I just want to say, like, it's beautiful how it could never be anything that we've done, and I could never do anything terrible enough that Jesus can't reach me.
I mean, I've done some terrible stuff. I mean, like, I make those jokes about things I haven't done, but like, to say that I'm like that I'm like next in line to Jesus is not anywhere near the story. And so it's like, if God can use that, then what can he do with people who actually are like wanting to follow him?
Praise God. It's good.
Thanks for listening.